100 years ago, Stormwind was nearly destroyed by gnolls. Normally disorganized, the packs united under the cunningly brutal Alpha Garfang, but without Bareth and Rin's courage and some quick thinking, the whole kingdom could have been lost. There's always been questions though. I mean, why was Garfang so smart? How did Stormwind come so close to destruction when it's literally gnolls? Turns out, we may actually find out in this next expansion. Dragonflight is going to have something called Grand Adventures Through Time. There's Gnoll Wars, the Black Empire, Pandaren Revolution, War of the Shifting Sands, big eras that we've never even seen in the game before. We'll also be hopping into what looks to be a tomorrow, a future that the Primalists want to bring about, and also a Murloc-dominated Azeroth. It's all quite something. Of course, Blizzard love playing with time magic, and I know sometimes that can be spooky, but if you go to the classic stuff like the Caverns of Time, it's just cool. So we've right now got no idea what these time adventures are going to be. We know that they exist because of data mined map names though, so let's check out where we're going to be headed. But of course, not before I make you aware that it is the final, 2 days of this month's Patreon, so axolotl pin. The axolotl pin, it is so nice. Also, it's like Machinist month, so we got some awesome art, we got the class card, and the axolotl pin. Only a few days left until the month rolls over, and is Rogue next month? It might be Rogue, I'm not 100% sure though. Anyway, if you want some fun stuff, including a class card to sit in your desk, check out the Patreon. It's the best way to help us, and everything is of course made by our Game Studios art team. So, it's all fun, and now that you know that, let's go. Alright, this one looks promising. So remember, all we have so far is basically names for the events, like the Gnoll War, right? And then we have the physical maps that roughly do correspond to where those events took place, like Elwyn. So first up, it seems we might be able to go way back to the Black Empire. Long before Night Elves, long before Trolls, Azeroth was dominated by the Elemental Lords, but without the element of spirit, they had no balance, so they were in constant strife. But one night, that eternal cycle of strife was broken when the skies opened up, and the Old Gods just plopped down onto Azeroth. So they, of course, spread their corruption across the land, and two races rose up from the weird void slime, the Niraki and the Akir. These servants built big ziggurats and temples around the bloated bodies of their gods, creating this horrible dark civilization that totally dominated Azeroth. Now, by the time the Elemental Lords realized that it was a threat, the Old Gods were actually just far too powerful, and so they enslaved them. That was the state of Azeroth for a very long time, maybe many, many thousands of years. The Black Empire totally controlled the surface of the planet, the Old Gods slowly wormed their tentacles towards the World Soul, and it was as it was. Until the Titans one day found Azeroth, and they imprisoned those Old Gods, ending the Black Empire. So we have a Black Empire map then for this. That means we're going back to a time where the Old Gods were at the peak of their power. Why would we do that? I mean, this was long before the dragons were empowered, so it's not likely directly connected to dragon lore. A guess, though, is elemental stuff, because elemental magic is a central thing in this expansion. We saw that when the island basically came back to life in the cinematic trailer, and we're just seeing it in all sorts of places with the primal furbolgs, the sort of elemental tauren. Everything is a little bit more version 1, I suppose, over there in the Isles. Everything's kind of going back to the elemental source, and that's the central conflict between the dragon aspects and the primal incarnates. So way back when, the elements were totally dominated by Void. Now obviously that connection was severed, but things did run pretty deep, because when Deathwing tried to bring about his Hour of Twilight, Ragnaros and Alakir joined up with Void, whereas Therazane and Neptulon did not. And more recently in BFA, the Cult of Ragnaros actually tried to bring him back, so who knows, maybe we could even see him again there. So, elemental energy, it's important in this expansion anyway. The Old Gods have a bit of a relationship with it, the Primalists love it, the Dragons opted for the Titans instead, so we're probably just going to learn quite a bit about some of the oldest history of the world through this event. And now for something totally different. An alternate Azeroth exists with murlocs as the apex species. A Murloc map of Dragonflight has surfaced. Everything looks the same, but the names are of course in Nurglish, their language. This isn't just Azeroth from a Murloc perspective either. Check this out. There's an item named the Heart of Azmirloth. So who knows? We'll be searching for Azmurlight. The item actually has got an attached spell called Time Port to Azmurloth, so I don't know, maybe that's our key to getting there. Do we just fall into an alternate universe as a joke? I don't know. There's also a battle pet called Murloc from the heroic version of Dragonflight, so I don't know, will she be atop the bizarre Wormrest temple we see here? I don't know. Could make your brain go into overdrive. Are there Titan Murlocs? Sargeras Murlocs? Elune Murlocs? I know it's kind of ridiculous, but that's what it's supposed to be, so I hope they do something kind of crazy with this one. Next, a slice of just real boots in the ground lore. So, Stormwind was founded 1100 years ago, but for like 1,000 years, it was a pretty backward place. It was obsessed with the light, and it was self-sufficient to the point of not really having to trade as much, so they were just really locked down compared to the rest. Now that changed 100 years ago when Landan and then Barathen Rin, Anduin's great-grandfather, began to expand their borders into Westfall, Redridge, Sunnyglade, which now of course is called Duskwood. Expanding the borders, though, would bring problems, like all the people who live in those border regions. Now, gnolls at the time were no threat to this well-organized, heavily armored army of Stormwind, but very slowly their raids got a bit larger, a bit more brutal. Packs that previously were divided started to actually work together and become coordinated. And in the hills of Redridge, one big gnoll, Narfang, had grown really strong and really smart, so he united the packs. He sends small raiding parties into Elwyn, so predictably Stormwind kind of pulls back to the Heartland, and that is when Narfang actually unleashed his real plan. All of the other packs on the border regions, that creates a massive strain as Stormwind just struggles, and soon they make it to the city gates. The conclusion is a big gamble by Barathen and his knights. And that's a showdown that actually happens in Redridge, but the map that we've got here is Elwyn, so that makes me think that this event is probably going to be maybe us protecting the capital or something like that. But certainly, dealing with a bunch of gnolls, I mean, we actually do that in the new zones anyway, but as a big sort of narrative event like this, that could be really cool. And I'm not sure what we could learn from this one. There has been a little bit of a mystery in the past, like what made Garfang so effective. Was he truly this kind of Genghis Khan-like dude who united all the tribes? Was somebody pulling the strings? We don't really know. But I think that's a period of the lore that is just generally not thought about and would definitely be fun to expand. A key pillar to Pandaria's rich culture is its very interesting history. So you've got the ancient tyrant Mogu, the generationally attacking Mantid, and the traditions of the Shadowpan, just to name a few of the things going on there. Now, one of the events that sticks out the most in the mind is the Pandaren Revolution. 12,000 years ago, Lei Shen's Mogu Empire stretched across the whole continent. He was a cruel dude, it's a pretty decadent regime, it brutally enslaved the others, and, you know, just all the excesses and what you could expect. But of course, Lei Shen eventually died, and the Mogu Empire began to crumble. But the new emperor, Lao Fei, was still powerful, still extra cruel to the slaves. For a mild transgression, you know, families would be separated. Brewmaster Kang then comes in. His child was sent to the Serpent Spine Wall as fodder for the Mantid. His wife was killed when she tried to stop it, and this obviously, well, made him furious. So he turned this rage to balance, and that became the seed of the whole revolution. It was illegal for slaves to hold weaponry, so instead he thinks, okay, I've got my body, I'll turn that into a weapon, and that is what develops the martial arts that, well, drive the monk in-game. So he teaches some other slaves this technique, and eventually the Order of Monks is formed. Their first big strike was against the engine of Nalak Shah, which of course we've seen in the game, and without that flesh-shaping facility, the Mogu were basically just left without their constructs. So this was a big, crazy, stunning victory right at the heart of their power that then led many of the other races, like the Yangol and the Jinyu, to join up in the revolution. And that's a revolution, of course, that culminates in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, and the Vale is exactly the map that we got on the Alpha, which means that perhaps our grand time adventure will be maybe when Kang faces off against Lao Fei. And that could be the whole event, the whole story, right? The last day of the Mogu Empire, the first day of the Pandaren. Could be pretty neat. Primalist Tomorrow seems to be a window into a potential future. Is it good? Is it bad? I'd say probably bad. So the Primalists are the proto-drakes who refuse to be empowered by the Titans. Instead, they reject them in favor of the more like elemental magic, the more fundamental stuff that's just always been there in Azeroth. And they are why Neltharion secretly creates the Drakthir. So we could basically be looking at an end-time style map that has been supercharged with elemental magic. Seems neat. I imagine it will serve a sort of similar function to the end time, which I guess then makes me wonder, why are we going on this grand time adventure? Is it perhaps at the Infinite Flight, or trying to mess around with these pivotal moments in the past, or perhaps do something in a distant future that will impact us today? Who knows? Time loops, causality. Don't think about it. Now for the big one. So the Scepter of the Shifting Sands is, I mean, it's WoW's longest, most epic quest chain. It stands out in the memory. Its origin story is also an incredible piece of the game's lore, and we might actually get to see it. So, 1,000 years ago, Fantril Staghelm had an idea. For some quick context, he wanted to grow Teldrassil without the dragon's blessing, which is something that ends up basically leaving Teldrassil open to corruption, basically kind of creating the Emerald Nightmare. Now, it goes deeper than that as well, but for one of his early bad ideas, Fantril wanted to regrow Silithus. He sent his son, Valstan, who lost to the desert, blunders into Anchorage, wakes up the Karaji from their hibernation, and they of course kill him and his druids. They swarm Silithus, they swarm the Night Elf territory. Eventually, the elves go to the Bronze Dragons to get some help, but Anachronos refuses. Then he quickly realized that that was a really bad idea when he discovered an old god temple at Anchorage's heart. Long story short, Anachronos gets all the Dragonflights on board, and along with the Night Elves they fight a big old battle in Silithus. And that's probably where we are going to be dropping in. Honestly, it could be a pretty incredible opportunity for Blizzard to showcase these characters' backstory, even as we're hanging out with them in Valdrakken. I mean, the War of the Shifting Sands, one of the more large, interesting conflicts in the game lore, so to actually see it in-game would be cool. I mean, it's the sort of thing that when people think about the Caverns of Time, they just think it would be cool to go and see this and go and see that. And we don't know what this content will be, but it seems like it could do that. Now, the map in Alpha is a bit weird. It still has modern features like the Twilight camps on it, so either those things will just disappear in an updated map or will be just bounded to a little bit of the map. But a key feature is the bones of Grakarond, who's this massive bronze dragon killed by Anubiseth during the war. Perhaps that could be the set piece for the event, seeing that dragon die? Who knows? But luckily for us, it is that's also the point where the battle turns in our favor, so if we do turn up then, I guess we'll win. Who knows? But I'm pretty excited to see it. This one's odd. It's just out of temporal bounds. So it doesn't seem like a time travel scenario, but I don't know, maybe it's a mess with time scenario? Who knows what it is? I mean, the title doesn't really give that much away, but a map of the Bronze Dragon's stronghold in Thaldraszus does. On this map is a spot of desert with a time anomaly bubble around it. I mean, hey, time anomalies, they're a classic thing in the likes of Trek and often kind of fun. But what's really key here is that it's actually the same effect that we see the first time we meet Morozond in the Bronze Dragon Shrine in Wrath of the Lich King. So what if this is, because in that event, we of course meet our future self. So what if now in Dragonflight is the bit where we go back to our past self? That would be cool. Of course, Morozond was defeated in Cataclysm, but Nozdormu, of course, warns that he will be a threat again in the future. And I think key here is his dungeon journal saying that Morozond exists out of time, so outside of temporal bounds. I don't know, we've got no idea if Morozond is the big bad of Dragonflight, but stuff like this nearly confirms his inclusion. And that's kind of exciting to me because he's a character I kind of would have wanted to see. Okay, so there you go. That's our quick little run through the Grand Time Adventure. Now you sort of understand the eras that we may actually be visiting in this feature. You know what? It sounds pretty cool to me. The more that they do with time, that like actually allows them to visit those older parts of the game's history, right? Like the you know, the whole Well of Eternity dungeon. Like that was just cool. So I think the more of that, the merrier. We just have to see what this content actually looks like. Anyway, that's it from me. Check out the other videos on the channel, and I'll see you next time.